A fully formed cover-up of the existence of Sasquatch stretches the boundaries of my imagination. While I understand the implications that proof of unknown creatures residing in our forests would have on industries like logging or even hunting, I struggle to understand how to connect the dots between the government, our military, and Bigfoot. I can, however, understand the far more believable notion of a small-scale need to gloss over sightings in a place like Denali. Norm's discussion with his superior sounds believable and even further bolsters the possible existence of Sasquatch in this part of the state. It makes sense after all. It's a suitable habitat for these things, and their more aggressive nature in this part of the country is probably due to the fierce competition for food they face. But could it be something else? One of the most well-known accounts of hairy creatures was that of Albert Ostman, who claimed to have been taken captive by a family of Sasquatch somewhere deep in the mountains of British Columbia. He claimed to have escaped his captivity, but not until he'd learned that his reason for being taken wasn't as a meal for hungry creatures, but rather to be a mate for the female juvenile member of the family. It's a bizarre story, but one that draws similarities to indigenous tales of women and even children being taken by Sasquatch and then adopted into a similar family unit. Another early well-known account is the Ape Canyon incident. Most of those already educated on the Sasquatch topic are familiar with it, but a Cliff's Notes version would simply state that in the early 20th century, a group of miners, somewhere in northern Washington, were attacked while sleeping in their cabin by a group of angry apes. The apes hurled rocks at their cabin and eventually tried to gain entry before being warned off by gunshots from the terrified miners. It turns out that this historical account has some modern-day successors, and one of them took place here in Alaska and involved Fred Roll.
One of my elders had planned this gold mining prospecting trip for a couple of years. We were good for a 10-day trip out there to do some looking for pay dirt, basically, some sample buckets for him to file a claim. We get up on the Nuyakuk, and it's a salmon counting tower. So this place hasn't been used in, when we were there, it had probably been close to 10 years that it hadn't been used. And it's basically 8-foot square, 2x4 framing with 5H plywood. And they had the windows blocked off as a blackout. When we got there, we unload and we were contemplating kind of checking things out. But as it was starting to get dark, we figured we would just chill and wait till the next day. So we're inside. My elder had just got done making us a meal a few minutes before, and it was just about a half hour after dark. The whole place just kind of goes, like we figured the wind, but there was no wind blowing. Well, as I look over my cousin's shoulder, there was a small gap, and I saw something dark move out of the way of the window. We're on a salmon river. I was immediately like, bear. So he grabs the rifle. I had that shotgun and grabbed that spotlight. We opened the door to run this bear off, and the riverbank is literally 15, 20 feet to my right as we go out the door, and it's kind of on a cut bank. So we beam and there's nothing there, and we're literally like maybe 1.5 feet out the door, shoulder to shoulder. And as I panned to the left, that's when we saw the 3 sets of eyes shine, and immediately we knew something was real wrong, because it was just, it's hard to explain the feeling of instant dread. The worst kind of icky feeling on the inside, like you just knew it was all bad. Well, we immediately ducked back in. When we got back inside, he's right here on my left, and he's holding a rifle like this, and when I was speaking to him, it was like everything was muffled. It was almost like talking to someone on a plane when your ears haven't popped. It was similar to that. And I was like, did you see the eye shine? And then all of a sudden, my cousin's underneath that card table. He's got a death grip, and he had wet himself, and he's looking across that shack at the other window. So we look at each other, and then we look down at him, and I still got I'm holding the shotgun in my hand offhanded, and we turn and look at the window where he was looking, and that's when we saw the face in the window. And as soon as I made eye contact with it, within 2 seconds, I shot 3 times through the wall. And then the whole place shifted a couple feet real quick. It almost took me off my feet when the place shifted. I thought they were gonna push us in the river because we were right there. This face I saw from the bottom of its nose to the top of its brow, and it filled that 18-inch gap. I had no doubt. There was no mind speak or nothing like that. It was just an immediate understanding that I was food. After the place had shifted, my elder went back and sat on the bunk and was just sitting there. I think he got out his Bible. But my younger cousin, he was under the table, still just looking out the window, death gripping, and I went to get that 30-06 from him because I wanted a more powerful gun, but it was loaded and he wasn't letting go. He was out there. So when I get him up and I coach him back to reality, because he was still babbling a little bit, it took like a good 3 to 5 minutes just to get him to let go of the gun. You know, I ended up sitting there for hours underneath that lamp, pumping it every once in a while. And I resigned myself that I was going to die. I just knew that there was no other side to this. It was going to, somehow they were going to get us. We had a short conversation about how we were going to get out of there, and our plan was to make it to the skiff, which was about 20, 25 feet away, roughly 20 foot to the trail, and then it drops down to landing there at the river. Got our game plan. We were going to get in the skiff and use that spotlight and see the water and just drift away from there. My cousin was like, well, let's spotlight out the windows and see if we see any activity out there. There was an old outhouse about 40 foot, you know, kitty corner off the back corner of this place. So when we beamed, we were looking at the place we saw the eye shine first, and we're trying to sweep back, and we saw nothing until we reached that outhouse and we saw this black silhouette behind it. It was every bit of like 13, 14 feet tall. The size of it was immense, but what was scary was it was like it was absorbing the light. It was so pitch black. So we saw that and we saw it move, and when it moved to its, would be its left, we immediately killed that spotlight and we all tucked back into that little cubby. We're freaked out. We got barrels crossed and we had all the lamps and stuff off, so it was dark. It was pitch dark. I'm not sure how much time had passed after that happened, because it almost sounded like off in the distance rotor wash, like the near distance. It was like a thump, 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 thump kind of sound. And we're like, and then we started feeling it in the ground. Well, it was one of these things that ran by the window. It ran by and it was like they were staged around the place, and all of a sudden they were all running around it. And at one point, it sounded like one of them was sniffing the trailer. They could have broke that place and smashed us against a tree, just like that. You know, and that's another question that drives me forward too, is why didn't they? As it was getting lighter, we were getting more brave to make it to the skiff. So we got all of our important stuff. We went out the door. Now, when we go out the door, it only takes seconds. I mean, we were motivated. We get to the edge of the river. My cousin jumps down to get the boat started, the skiff started. This rock bigger than a basketball whizzed by my head. Like, if I hadn't slid back a little bit, we wouldn't have this conversation right now. So immediately my eyes lock onto it. That noise snapped me out of it, and I whip around, and that big black thing was coming out of the tree line. And I immediately, 30-06, I put 3 rounds, center mass. Now, I heard the rounds hit this thing. I heard them thuck. I heard the impact. This thing didn't flinch. It stopped moving forward. It still boggles my mind, because it just stopped moving forward. So immediately we get down in the skiff and we're trying to get out of there, and unbeknownst to me, I found this out years later, they were still chucking rocks at the outboard as we were getting up on step to go back down the Nuyakuk. I don't know, it's hard to explain. I got personal issues, you know what I mean? Not a vendetta, but just personal issues. And what drove that? We got there and we went right into that cabin. We weren't out whooping it up, shooting something. You know, we weren't disrespecting the land in any way. That, in the moment, it's really hard to grasp. But looking back on it, 20/20 hindsight, I still don't have an understanding of it, but it unlocks this primal fear that you don't even know you have. It's really hard to put into words.
Do you think these things are supernatural in any way, or flesh and blood?
Well, I heard it hit flesh and blood, you know. I think they're flesh and blood, and they've just been around forever. I mean, our heritage, it's always been a part of it, you know, our oral history. The hairy man's always been a part of it.
So people missing in Alaska. This is a hot topic because it happens pretty frequently.
We have something called inyokun. It can take you. I don't know where they take you. They're dark, like black. They are hairy, kind of like a Bigfoot.
Is it possible that some of these missing people go missing because of another monster, the Sasquatch? I think it's entirely possible because Sasquatches are not your forest friend. They are animals trying to survive.
If Sasquatch really wanted to, and in considering people like me or even just people in suburbia, if they wanted to, they could push people out of rural areas back to population centers.
A lot of the Alaska Native, the superstition is that if you're in their territory, they will take you.
And they were just hanging out in the cabin. Well, they heard a noise up on the roof, and then something was going on just outside the door, and it lured them out.
Death by Alaska is real common. You get a mile away from the village, that's death out there. Alaskan can kill you without even trying.